there. Welcome to the Bronx Buzz. This is Bronx Nets program where we talk to reporters and writers and editors and filmmakers and photographers, anybody who puts stuff out in the Bronx. In our second segment, we're going to talk to a well-known Bronxite who has a new short story out that is of a very personal and interesting nature that relates directly to life in the Bronx. So stay tuned for that. But to get started, we're going to say hello to a new guest. He's never been on our program before. It is Dave Colon. He is a reporter for Streetsblog. Nice to have you with us, Dave.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Dave, you've done a lot of, maybe before we even get into it, just a little bit about Streetsblog so people will know what it is, who it is, and what you folks are all about.
Sure. Streetsblog is a website that's been around, I think, maybe 15 years at this point. I haven't been there the whole time.
Okay.
But it focuses a lot on, I think, what people would call at this point livable streets. So kind of ways to make the city work through the use of bike lanes, through emphasizing bus lanes on the surface, getting mass transit to work better, finding ways to get trucks off the road by things like cargo bikes, basically anything that kind of emphasizes what people would say, people-powered transportation, people-first transportation, instead of having kind of planning that goes car first.
Yeah. So let's get into this whole idea of congestion pricing. It's fascinating because I think a lot of people don't know what it is, why it is. They hear about it. It might cost some people a couple of dollars in their pocket. Let's be boldly honest. Streetsblog is behind it, likes the idea. So why don't you say where this process is at? This dialogue has been going on for many, many, many years, but we're getting closer, aren't we?
Yeah. And honestly, yes, this has been something that has been talked about for quite some time. Officially, maybe back it started with Mike Bloomberg proposing it. It never really made its way out of Albany, where it needed to get the ultimate approval from. Before I go through all that, right now, we are at the stage where the MTA has released what it's called an environmental assessment, which is a study of what the toll would kind of effects the toll would have around the region, not just in the what they call the Central Business District, which is Manhattan south of 60th Street. Basically, if they put a toll to enter in a car south of 60th Street, and that would also mean when you come off the East River bridges, when you come through the tunnels that are down there, you would pay a toll of some amount. And what the EA studies is kind of the varying effects it would have on traffic, on air quality, on economic concerns, cultural and neighborhood character concerns, really anything you can think of. And this was something that the MTA waited for a couple of years to know whether or not they had to do this. It got kind of held up during the Trump administration. People said they were playing politics, which certainly seemed to be the case, because when Joe Biden took office, the United States Department of Transportation said, more quickly, certainly than the Trump people did, you can do an environmental assessment. So they took a number of months.
They got the process started.
Yes. So the process started with that. And now the environmental assessment has come out. We're in a comment period for it. You can comment on it up through September 9th, I believe. They've had some, kind of a video conference comment periods. People can give their opinions on it, whether they're pro or against. It's right now, this is the hearings are supposed to kind of be getting at, does the environmental assessment do and show that congestion pricing does what it says it would do? Does it improve air quality? Does it reduce traffic? Does it provide funding for the MTA, which is also an important piece of this?
That's really, I just want to get to that. That to me is the biggest thing. If you're going to charge people money and make sure that that money goes to mass transit, because if you're going to say to people it's going to be more expensive if you go into Manhattan, well, you say, all right, then I'll take the train. But if the trains are not, they're still behind schedule, there aren't enough trains, they're overcrowded, they're not safe. I mean, on and on and on, which a lot of people are concerned about when they go, let's say, to a show in the evening or dinner and a show. They're going to, have to pay an extra toll to encourage them to get onto mass transit and have that not improved. doesn't work,
Right.
right?
So absolutely, and I've just been doing this for so long at this point, so I'm sorry if I get ahead of myself sometimes.
That's okay.
The ultimate goal of this is it is legislatively mandated that it has to raise $1 billion a year for the MTA's capital plan. And obviously, and the capital plan is different from the operating budget, where the operating budget is here's how we run the trains, we pay people to drive the buses, drive the trains, so on. The capital budget is what goes towards system improvement, system upkeep, the things that you were just saying. Do we want to make the signal system, more of a 21st century signal system? Congestion pricing is supposed to help with that. Do we want to install more elevators, accessibility options? Congestion pricing is supposed to help with that, because ultimately what the $1 billion is supposed to do, and what's set for the current capital plan that the MTA has, is it's supposed to raise $1 billion, and then that will be bonded out to $15 billion.
When drivers got a raise in tolls on the bridges, the various bridges, and it's happened over a period of years, there's been a lot of concern that that money never really found its way to the MTA, much like the campaign for fiscal equity. They never found the lottery monies never found its way to the education department. Are you convinced that there's enough administrative infrastructure that if that's what happens, the money will really go, and then riders on the MTA will see improvements?
Well, you know what? The law says that there's something that they created, a capital program lockbox, which is something that this money and a couple other new taxes that the state created to help fund the MTA capital plan when congestion pricing was passed, all that money is supposed to go into what they call this lockbox. And that does mean that this money just goes directly there. There's potential ways that you can change the law to say that we want this money to go towards the operating fund instead, that we want this money to go somewhere else. But it would really take kind of, I think, a huge sea change for people to all of a sudden say, we're going to get behind an idea to take money out of the capital plan, only because this capital plan, if you remember Andy Byford, was something that he helped push over the line. It's something that people have been really looking forward to getting the transit system, not only kind of to a decent state of good repair, but to a real 21st century system that can actually kind of avoid a lot of signal problems, that has modern rolling stock, that is taken care of better. So in that sense, that is why the state created the lockbox in the same time that they created this charge.
There's been a lot of talk about exceptions. Now, let's just say somebody needs cancer treatments and goes to a medical center that's below 60th Street and needs to do that every day, or rides an accessorized vehicle, a senior citizen who needs some kind of medical treatment has to go below 60th Street. And there are many other exceptions that are out there. There's talk about trucks, different types of trucks, ones delivering medical supplies. I mean, I don't know the whole list. And some people say no exceptions because that'll open up a can of worms. There are other people who say, like, just using the example of somebody who needs cancer treatments down, at the NYU Center on 34th Street. It goes down there every day. I mean, really, are you going to take these people's money? I mean, that's just kind of a weird way to go about saving the world. So what do you think about that? Are we going to be able to come up with equitable exceptions, or no exceptions? Find another way to get downtown.
Sure. So, there's a couple things to think about with the exemptions to the toll. One of them is that there are already a couple of exemptions in the law. Emergency vehicles. There's what they're calling a tax credit for people who live in the toll cordon south of 60th Street. If your household makes less than $60,000 a year, you get a tax credit for what you have paid to go in and out. And then the third one is vehicles that are carrying disabled people. So something like Accessoride would be exempt from this. And then when you start talking about other exemptions, the problem is twofold. You mentioned the whole thing about, well, you've got a can of worms, and one person will say, well, I have just as noble of a reason to be exempted from this as somebody else.
That's right. Yeah.
And what happens is the more exemptions that you put on this toll, the higher the toll has to be for everyone who winds up paying it. because it's legislatively required to raise $1 billion. Now, I think that you can say everybody has a different, I don't want to say sob story because that sounds a little bit too dismissive, but everybody has a case that they can make to say, well, I have to go there, or I like to drive there, or whatever it is.
Right.
I've seen people also say, in terms of, let's say, your person who has to go to Midtown for a medical appointment. There are people who take the train or take the bus who do that, and they still have to pay. It's not something where you say, well, we get it. You have a very heartfelt reason, and we're gonna not have you
Right.
do
It
this.
will be interesting to see what the public's commentary is like, according to the various assessments. Before we run out of time, one last thing, which of course is very personal to the borough of the Bronx. Many people are saying this will force trucks to get on more trucks on the Cross Bronx, if you can even imagine that. I mean, I don't even know how that works, or doesn't work. So what about those kinds of considerations that say it'll force traffic into other places?
Sure, sure. So
We only
I
got
think that
about 60 seconds. So
okay, well, the issue of the Bronx is one that the MTA has said there will possibly be more cars and more trucks, especially depending on the scenario. Richie
okay.
Torres has been right when he's talked about this, Congressman. Depending on which tolling scenario there is, this is a big opportunity for the city, the state, the federal government to kind of come together and say, okay, we see this could be a problem going forward, so we're going to do some of these things. We're going to make the Hunts Point Terminal Market greener. We're going to find ways to start capping the Cross Bronx Expressway. We're going to put these resources into finding more ways to get
Yeah.
polluting vehicles out of the South Bronx. And, this is a big opportunity to do that.
So the timing is just, let's just lay it
Sure,
out there. The
sure.
timing is
Right
the
now,
hearing on, or the final comment period is September 9.
yeah,
And then
I
what happens
believe
after that?
I believe it's through September 9th. There's commentary period. Then the MTA is going to go back. It's going to look at all the comments. It's going to go to the federal government and say, here's what people have said. They're going to come out with basically by December, people are thinking that the federal government is going to issue its final declaration, its final ruling on congestion pricing, either December or January next year. If it says, okay, you guys have done the requisite amount of work, and we believe you that this is going to do what it says it will, and it won't have horrible impacts on other people, then the MTA has an opportunity to
Right.
start putting the toll infrastructure in, and it would start probably
Got it.
by the end of 2023.
And it will all be done by license plate, I guess,
Yeah,
photographs
yeah,
or something
Easy
like that.
Pass, similar kind of thing.
Dave Cologne, we're probably going to ask you to come back as this thing
Oh,
moves forward, because you're an expert and we want to hear a lot about it. And thank you for taking your time. Best regards to all our friends at Streetsblog, and we'll see you around town. Thank you
thank
so
you for having
much.
me.
Great. All right, folks, we'll take a short break. When we come back, we are going to visit, as I mentioned, with a popular Bronxite who has written something that you're going to want to know about. We'll be right back. All right, back with you on the Bronx Buzz. I am thrilled to have, I don't want to say an old friend because we don't want to characterize our ages, but he's a longtime friend. And it is Charles Rice-Gonzales, a writer, co-founder of BAD, the Bronx Academy of Arts and Dance. And as I said, a friend of Gary Axelbank for many years. Nice to see you, Charles.
It's great to be here. Great to see you too, Gary.
Let's just, before we get into the short story, which, as I told you just before, I just was moved by tremendously. Just talk about your writing. What kinds of things do you look to write about? And then ultimately for this, why did that feed into kind of your agenda, if you will, or what your passion is?
Yeah. I think one of the things, there's a phrase like write what you know. And so I love the idea of writing what you know, and things that I know are the Bronx, things that I know of myself, growing up in the Bronx, Puerto Rican, queer, person of color, and so I like writing about those ideas or those themes, those things. Also, growing up in the time, really part of my own activism, my love of art. So the things I like to write about stem from those things. So I've written a novel that's called Chulito, that's about a young queer kid coming out in Hunts Point, and that's been almost 10 years ago that book came out. But many of the stories spring from this place, spring from the Bronx, spring from the Bronx is always in there in some way, shape, or form. Um, and part of that is because I was inspired by many other writers, particularly Abraham Rodriguez, the first time I read one of his books, and was able to see the Bronx so vividly portrayed. And I was familiar with the streets and everything. So it was just so much fun to read. So I said I was inspired to do that as well. So I
I
very
always
go ahead.
go ahead. You wanted to finish that? Go ahead.
Well, just I very often make sure that the Bronx, whether it's front and center or there is some way I bring the Bronx into the conversation.
Well, you're preaching to me. I'm preaching to the choir. I mean, to me, everything has the Bronx in it, so you don't have to go too far. But uh, I'm always interested in this, not only about a writer's muse, but how much of yourself is documented in there, or is in this particular story. And I don't want to hold people in suspense anymore, but in this particular story, is it somewhat biographical without you using your own name, or is it something that you kind of fantasized, if you will, about what could be?
Well, Deep Salvage is fiction. It's a fiction
It's
story.
full
I'm not
fiction.
the main character or the supporting character in there. But in many ways, writers may say this, but I'll just say this for myself as a writer. I'm braided into all of these, right? And then the people around me are braided into them. Very often, I
Yes.
get inspired by a person or a particular, and the character becomes a collage of different people. But this story in particular grew from my it was a challenge. I had gone to a conference, and it was a LGBTQ conference for writers in New Orleans called Saints and Sinners. And there was a very famous writer, and he said there was a time when all queer writers were writing about was AIDS, and that since that changed, that what would stories about HIV or AIDS look like now? And so that stuck with me. And that was like 10 years ago, I think, maybe, that he made that challenge to the room. And so I was thinking about it, but I also thought a lot about my own history here in the Bronx. And so sometimes there's a section in there, there's a roll call of names of different people.
Yes.
And some of those were actual people that I, did
Uh,
did a lot of activism for.
um,
So
the first sentence captured me and engaged me and made me think as a heterosexual man in the Bronx. And I'm going to say it. I didn't think people died of AIDS anymore.
mhm,
Whoa. And so then you knew you were into something that people don't talk about. And I'm just going to tell you what my impression of the entire thing, because it's a tremendous romance. It gets into the relationships between people, why they get together, the walls between them, and then what binds them, and then yeah, I mean, I'm telling you what I picked out of it. Um, but what I was not aware of until really I read this, so you were successful, is the level to which HIV affected and still apparently affects uh, gay people's relationships with each other. That
mhm.
you can have this relationship, but there is that undercurrent that you can't control to some degree.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, like I talk about people in the story, that in a way, I often use a phrase that there are a lot of ghosts sometimes inside of the stories, right? Not
Yes.
necessarily literally, but they are people or experiences that kind of live there in a phantom like way. And in a way, there is we're in a different time with HIV and AIDS. I mean, there was in the 80s and 90s, it was like fatal.
It was it was an epidemic, a pandemic, if you will. I mean, I don't know what the level is, but it
Mhm.
was horrifying. Yeah.
Yeah. And so in a way it casts a long shadow. And so we're in a different time right now, but there are certain conditions which I learned about. That the term deep salvage was that sometimes people for different reasons become resistant to the drugs, and it's almost like 1992, or the 80s and 90s for them. And so luckily today there's constantly advances, so I think deep salvage will be something of the past, and hopefully at some point so will
Right.
HIV and AIDS. But it's still, it's kind of like the haunting that it does to relationships. And so even still, so I felt like that. And I'm glad you said it was a romance, because that's what it is.
Oh,
Ultimately it's
there's
a
no question about it in my
yeah.
mind. Yeah, of
Mhm.
course. But it's and it doesn't matter if you're gay or straight or whatever the heck you are. When you meet, especially you meet somebody in the Bronx. Let's use the Bronx. You meet somebody there. You don't know how close to get. You don't know if it's working. You don't know if it's the real love that you want. Yet
Mhm.
you're attracted, and of course, there's a sexual attract. I mean, it just played with all that, and then somewhere toward the end, it comes up that, oh, by the way, you have an HIV problem, but your HIV problem is also my HIV problem.
Yeah.
In other words, that was very striking because you don't think about it now. Maybe, like you said, 1992, everybody was aware of it, but you may not be aware of it now. I mean,
Mhm.
I just really thought it was interesting. We should mention the Big Other, right? The Big Other is an online journal of Puerto Rican writers. Do you want to just talk about that and why this is appropriate for that
Mhm.
online publication?
Well, the Big Other, well, I'm going to say three things maybe about it. The Big Other
Okay.
is not specifically only Puerto Rican. They did a special Puerto Rican folio. So they curated a bunch of Puerto Rican writers, which was wonderful. I was glad that to be a part of that opportunity. But they published all kinds of things, from poetry to fiction, and some of the things on the online journal have won awards, and many award-winning writers have contributed to it. So I was very glad that that the piece I submitted was accepted. I was also really glad because the piece is kind of one of the longer ends of short stories, and that's one of the things I run into, is that a lot of times in print it becomes difficult because my stories tend to be a little longer than the average short story, which could be about 15 pages is a sweet spot for a short story. This one I think
It's
is
a little
about
longer. That's right. It's
yeah,
26
it's
pages. I have
26
it
pages.
right here in front.
So there are places that would publish that, but there's much less. And so far, the online environment provides an opportunity for longer works that are in this kind of in between place. So I was glad for that. And so the Big Other has really been doing a lot to promote the series of writers. And there's some great writers in the folio. There's Willie Perdomo's in it. There's Caridad, that's from the Bronx, is in it. There's Edwin Torres, another poet who's from the Bronx, that's in it. So I feel the Bronx is well represented in the group of writers that are a part of this folio.
You know what I do for a living? I'm always conscious of presenting a program for an audience, and my audience, of course, is the Bronx. I'm always interested in writers who write. Did you think about, well, I'm going to write this for gay people, or I'm going to write this for straight people, or I'm going to like, did you have an audience in mind, or did you just say to yourself, I'm writing a story, whoever reads it, that's fine? Or did you say,
Mhm.
this is something I wanted in a way, a gift to give to somebody? Yeah, I don't mean a person, but did you
Mhm.
have an audience in mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's both, right? I think I'm thinking specifically. I was thinking of like, well, there's not, believe it or not, there's not like tons of queer, particularly queer male relationship stories, right? That are
Yes,
stories about
that's totally true.
relationships.
Yep.
And so for me, I'm interested in that. So there is that perspective, but as you have noticed or picked up, yeah, it's like the whole idea of meeting, of falling in love, of being attracted, of, I love that you said, like, your HIV is my HIV, right? So in a sense, in a relationship, that's what it is, right? People come together and they just make a decision to share their lives with one another. And I think a lot of times there could be still, a lot of presuppositions or or assumptions, I want to say, about
Mhm.
queer relationships. And I think I'm finding that it's even becoming more urgent for me to continue writing and do more writing because, look, our current country right now, there's all these don't say gay bills.
I was just going to say that there are real problems out there. It's almost like we're going backwards, which blows my mind.
Yeah. And so, since that is kind of the activity that's happening, I think it's important for artists, for leaders to continue creating more, because we should fight for queer issues to be in schools and taught in schools. But that's not the only place where we can teach them. They can learn through literature, they can learn through the arts, they can learn through community. There's lots of different ways to do it. And so, for me, as you know, I run a space called BAD. And so we do it there, and I do it through writing and through some of my involvement in different organizations to continue um, just creating possibilities for how queer people can live and love in America.
While queer people might, identify with this and all that, I do think that there was a sense of normalizing these relationships and saying these are just the same relationships that everybody has, with all the details, with all the
Mhm.
nuances. You're a very detailed writer. I mean, I know you see the world like that because you know what's going on in those little spaces. So let's just wrap it up. Deep Salvage, how do people read it? They can see it on The Big Other, I guess, is where. And then, of
Yeah,
course, what's next, Charles? We're sitting at the edge of our seat waiting for you to get done with whatever you're working on.
that's great. Thank you. Well, yeah, it's great. The Big Other, you can get it. What I love about online publication is that it's free. And I posted it, and many people have read it. So please check out not only my story, but all the works on The Big Other. And it's literally that, thebigodher.com. And you can find these stories in there. You can search for them, or just
Great,
Google my name and my story and it'll come up. And then you can explore everything else.
great.
Next, so I mentioned that I wrote a novel called Chulito.
We've got about
And
25 seconds, so go ahead.
yeah, and so I'm working to get another novel published. I've already written it, called Hunts Point, which is a
Oh,
follow-up to that. It's a full novel, and Hunts Point is the neighborhood in which it's featured.
and guess what? As soon as it's out, you'll be here. We're going to invite you again.
Thank you.
Charles, always a pleasure, my friend. And thanks for the great work. I mean, talking about our people, talking about people of the Bronx in detailed ways, in personal ways, is so badly needed. And we appreciate you doing that.
Great. Thank you, Gary. Always a pleasure and honor.
So that's going to do it. We thank Dave Colon from Streetsblog for the first segment. We thank our buddy Charles Rice-Gonzales. And guess what's going to happen? We'll see you next week. Good night.